Hello, Bobcats. This is Mrs. Wilhite. We're in 5th grade math. We're still in chapter 1. We are now in lesson 2. We're working on place value this whole chapter, so you'll be seeing different place value lessons. You can also see it is a 5th grade standard. It's something we have to learn in order to be ready for the math that's coming in future grades. If we look at the objective today, or what I'm hoping that we'll learn, I will compare and order whole numbers through the millions. Well, something that stands out to me is compare. So you're going to be able to compare larger numbers, and you're also going to be able to order larger numbers. I'm hoping at the end of lesson 2 you can do this, and I think it's important that we understand, why do I have to learn this? One, we know that it is a standard in 5th grade. It's something we have to learn in order to be ready for the grades that are coming. But besides school, when you think about purchases, someday you'll be buying a home and you'll be dealing with values that are pretty large. 189,000 might be one home. And maybe another home is worth 193,000. And you can begin to look at what each of those homes has to offer to decide and compare which value is best for you and which value is best for your family. Also, when you think about quantities or amounts, you're going to have values that are very large amounts. Perhaps you're dealing with a population of different countries and you're doing a report. When you think about the amount of people living in one continent or one country, it's going to be a massive number. So you have to be able to order or look at those numbers and think, okay, what is larger? What is smaller? What has the greater value and what doesn't have the greater value? And today, as we're looking at comparing and ordering numbers, I want you to think about, what do you already know about comparing numbers? Well, from my experience, something that I know is these symbols. These symbols here. If it's greater than, you're going to use this symbol. If it's less than, we're going to use this symbol. And if it's equal or equivalent, we use this symbol. So the first value is greater than the second value. So an example would be 6 clearly is greater than 4. If your first value is a smaller number, a value that's less, then you're going to use the less than symbol. So 2 is less than 5. And then finally, of course, from my experience, I know that values can be equivalent or equal, and that's when I would use this equal sign. This will definitely help us in our lesson today, remembering what each of these symbols means. When we compare, when we order large numbers, we want to first start off with just lining them up. If we can line up the values starting with that ones place, it's going to make it easier to look at each individual digit, each place value compared to the next one. So we line it up first. After we line it up, then we can move on to comparing that largest or greatest value to solve the problem, which is step 3. Sometimes we solve by putting them in order from greatest to least or least to greatest, but in order for us to even compare, they have to be lined up. We have to be able to look at the greatest value in the digits to see, and then finally think, is it reasonable? Does my answer make sense? Am I answering the question at hand? Example 1. This table shows the 2 largest oceans in the world. Which ocean has the greatest area? Well, something I like to do is underline the question, and I can see there's a question mark right there, so I'm going to underline it. They want to know which one has the greater area, which one's larger. So step 1 tells me to line up the numbers starting with the ones place. So if I look at the ones period, I'm going to put that 0 and make sure that each digit is in the correct place value. So we can see that the Atlantic Ocean is actually in the millions period with its total value. And then if we look at Pacific Ocean and we put each of the digits into its corresponding place value, we can see that they both are in the millions period. So step 1, line it up starting with the ones period. Done. Check mark. Step 2, look at the greatest value. Well, the greatest value is 10 million, and I can clearly see that a 6 is larger than 3, or 60 million is larger than 30 million. So if we look at our sentence stem on the bottom, I concluded the answer is the Pacific, I'm going to use my capital letter, of course, Ocean is the greater value. It's reasonable because 60 million, right, because we're in the millions period, that's in yellow there. The 60 million is larger or greater than, there's that symbol, greater than 30 million. So again, we want to make sure that once we have finished a problem, we go back and we think, why is it correct? Well, this is correct because I proved the 6 there is larger than the 3. 60 is larger than 30. Example 2, the table shows the area in square miles in different countries. Use place value to order the countries from greatest area to least area. So there's no question mark. Instead, they're asking us to order the numbers from greatest to least. So we're going to put these numbers here in the chart in order from the largest value, the greatest value, to the smallest value. Well, step 1, we have to line up that ones place. So I'm going to start with the first one, Argentina, and I'm going to start in the ones place and line up each of those digits so I can easily compare. Now that I've lined up the numbers with the ones place, step 2 tells me to look at the greatest value. Well, the greatest value here is in the millions period, and I can see that I have a 2 million. 2 million is larger than 1 million. And if you look at the bottom value, I can actually put a 0 here to hold that place. And 2 is definitely bigger than 0 millions. 2 million. So I can see Australia definitely has the greatest square miles. And it asked me to put them in order from greatest to least. So this here is the greatest value. Now when we look at the two values that have 1 million as the first largest digit, we can then move on to the second digit, which of course is the 100,000. Well, 0 in the 100,000 is not going to be larger than this 2. The 200,000 is bigger than the other two values. I'm going to go ahead and write down Australia and then of course India. India has the second greatest value. So I'm looking for the next greatest value. I have Argentina left, and then I also have Norway. Well, I can clearly see that 1 million is greater than 0 million. So Argentina has the third largest area when you think about square miles. I can go ahead and write that on my chart. And once I've written Argentina, it really only leaves the last country, which is Norway, as the smallest value, the least area. This is reasonable because when you compare the numbers, and they're lined up, you can see 2 million is larger than the 1 million. And then you can clearly see 200,000 is larger than no 100,000. And finally, that Norway has the smallest square miles. Again, if we think back to our objective, right, we're going to compare and order larger numbers. Well, we've ordered a couple examples of ordering numbers. So now we're going to get into the comparing piece. This is where we really have to use those symbols. We're going to make this true. True being that if you write this symbol, this value is greater. If you write less than, the first value is less than the second value. And if you use equivalent, you're saying both values are equal. I'm going to do step 1, which is, of course, writing that ones place, 543 in the ones place. We have 655,000. When we look at the second value, we have 543, which are the same digits. And then we have 556,000. I can clearly see, looking at the greatest place value, step 2, 6 is larger than 5. So I need to say 655,553 is greater than the second value, 556,543. I theorize the answer is reasonable or correct because the 600,000 is larger or greater than the 500,000. So I can prove my answer by showing that 600,000 is greater than 500,000. And that's the nice thing too, is reflecting back and going back and justifying your answer, showing why it's reasonable. Then you're confident and you're able to move ahead knowing that the value you placed as greater than is in fact greater than the second value or the next value. Okay, again on this example 2 in the guided practice, we're moving into comparing less than, greater than, or equal. Well, and the first thing I notice is if we look at the ones period, we have 301 and we have 301 on both values. Well, and if we look at the thousands period, you can see this one and this one are very closely related. This is where the difference is. So if we wanted to write the numbers and make sure that ones place is lined up right underneath the other number, the other ones place, we can compare with the greatest value. Well, they both have 10 million. The difference in these two digits is there's 0 in the 100,000 and 200,000 in the second value. So I surmise the answer is 10,027,301 is less than, has a smaller value than 10,207,301. I know this is reasonable because 200,000 is greater than none in the 100,000 place. Okay, guided practice number 3, order the numbers 145,099, 154,032, 145,004, and 159,023 from greatest to least. Well, I'm going to underline greatest to least because they need me to find the biggest value and order these numbers all the way down to the smallest value. Well, step 1 says line it up according to that ones place, and you can see I've lined up all 4 of the values. I'm now going to look at the greatest place value to compare. Well, they all have 100,000, so that doesn't really help me. I now need to move into the 10,000 or the next digit, and I can see that 2 of the numbers or 2 of the values have a 5 in that 10,000's place. Well, I know that 5 is larger than 4. So it's definitely one of these 2 values that are the greatest because 50,000 is going to be larger than 40,000. If we look at the next digit, I can see that this one is a 4. And then also the one on the bottom value actually has a 9 in the thousands place. Well, I know that 9,000 is larger than 4,000. So that tells me that this value here is the largest of the 4. I can write that on my first line because it's the greatest value. Now that I've determined which 2 values are the greatest, I now need to figure out which of the last 2 values have the smallest or is least or less than the other value. Well, right away they both say 145,000, so that's not really helpful. I'm now going to look at the hundreds place. Well, they both have 0. Oh, but I can see there's 90 in the first one, and this has 0 tens. So the first value I wrote is going to be next in the order from greatest to least. I have figured out the answer and I put the numbers in order from greatest to least. I know it's reasonable because if we compare each of the place values, we can see that 159,000 is the largest, 154,000 is the second greatest, and out of the last 2, 99 is bigger than 4. So I know that my answer is in fact reasonable. Now that I'm in independent practice, it's asking me to compare less than, greater than, or equal to make the sentence true. Well, I have to line up the 2 values so that they are both in the correct place. Starting with that ones place, I can see that the 2 is underneath the 1 in the ones place. So we're keeping those periods lined up. Step 2, we can compare the greatest value. Well, they're both 400,000. So now I'm going to move on to the next place value. And I can see there is a difference here. I have 60,000. And then on the bottom value, I only have 20,000. So I can see that 462,211 is greater than 426,222. I know that it's greater than, I know it's reasonable because 60,000 is larger than the 20,000. So I know my answer is reasonable. Again, I'm in the independent practice. I'm now on problem 5. I'm comparing less than, greater than, equivalent. I need to make it true. Well, I've lined it up. I've done step 1. I can now look at the greatest place value on the left to see which is larger. Well, they both have 42 million. I can see a difference here where we get to the thousands period, and I can see that 300,000 is larger than 200,000. So I can go ahead and put my answer as 42,235,909 is less than the second value. It's less than 42,324,909. It's reasonable because 200,000 is less than 300,000. Again, if we look at that individual place value, it'll help us determine if in fact we have the correct answer. All right, we're now going to move into a little bit of problem solving, moving out of that comparing and ordering in the direct fashion and more of using a chart or a diagram. It says rank the following states from least to greatest in population. So again, if we look at the values in the chart, we have to put these values in order from least to greatest. Well, they have lined up the numbers for us. So we can start on the greatest value. We can look all the way over to the left to see that we have 11 million. So that's got to be the greatest value. But again, I'm not looking for the greatest to be written first. They want the population that's the least or the smallest value. And so if I look at the other 3 values, 2 in the millions place, Mississippi, has the lowest value. That state has the lowest population. So I can write Mississippi as the first value. Right, now that I've determined the largest value is Ohio, I went ahead and put that last, its greatest population. I put Mississippi, it had the smallest, the least amount of people living there first. So that leaves us with Alabama and Colorado. If we look at the 2 values in the orange box that are left, they both have 4 million people living there. But if we look at the thousands period, this is where we're going to find the difference. We can see that one of the values has 600,000. Alabama. And Colorado has 800,000 people. Well, I know that 600,000 is less than 800,000. So Alabama has the next smallest population. I can go ahead and write that down. And of course, the last step after we solve, step 3 is it reasonable? Well, I can clearly see Mississippi has the smallest population with 2 million. We have Alabama has 4,627,851. We have Colorado with 4,861,515, that 800,000 being the difference there. And then finally, the one with the greatest population, I'm not sure what they're all doing in Ohio, but there is 11 million people living there. So Ohio had the greatest population according to this chart. So my answer is definitely reasonable. I can go ahead and move on. All right, Bobcats, it's that final slide. Some of you are like, yes. Of course, I want you to just stop and think before you approach your independent work, before you log into MyMath or you're doing your workbook pages. I want you to think, what did you learn today? Okay, and I really hope that at the end of today's lesson, in summary, today I learned how to compare and order values, numbers. You have to be able to tell if numbers are greater than or less than, or if they have the same value. You also need to put order to numbers. What is the largest value here? Where's the difference? How much more is a number compared to another number? Which one has the smallest value? So again, I'm hoping today, Lesson 2, Chapter 1, you learned how to order and compare numbers. Thank you, Bobcats, for your attention.